Good afternoon. My name is Dan Cohen, and I'm a faculty member in the History Department here at Case, specializing in early American social and cultural history, including history of the book. I'm also a longtime rare book and manuscript collector. About 3 years ago, I was asked to participate in a conference not unlike this one on research libraries in the digital age, sponsored by the American Antiquarian Society. As many of you are no doubt aware, the AAS, located in Worcester, Massachusetts, is the world's greatest repository of early American books, pamphlets, and broadsides, and the lead institutional sponsor of the digital Early American Imprint series, Parts 1 and 2, which provide full-text online access to virtually all surviving early American publications from the beginning of printing in North America through 1819. The AAS is also heavily involved in digitizing early American newspapers and other periodicals. Although as a historian, I'm backward-looking both by inclination and by training, I was nevertheless unwisely asked by AAS to serve on a panel entitled Blue Sky Dreams, or the Research Library of the Future. Always eager to rain on other people's parades, I was planning to hypothesize in my brief remarks that the American Antiquarian Society was, institutionally speaking, cutting its own throat by rushing to digitize the bulk of its unmatched and often unique holdings. From my gloomy perspective, it stood to reason that as more and more of AAS's collections became available online, fewer and fewer scholars would find it necessary to travel to Worcester in order to use them there. In other words, in gaining a world of virtual readers, institutions such as the AAS, and presumably by extension, countless smaller special collections libraries, stood in danger of losing their traditional core function as a destination for flesh and blood scholars. But I'm basically a cautious person, and before making my presentation, I ran this line of argument by a few staff members at the AAS. And they persuaded me that there were several reasons why the sad fate that I foresaw was probably not imminent, at least not with respect to their own institution. But of course, not all special collections libraries have holdings as vast and unique, or funding as extensive, or reputations as sterling and far-reaching as those of the American Antiquarian Society. And it does still seem to me that special collections libraries do have to strategize very carefully in order to maintain their relevance in a digital future. And I'd like to briefly mention 6 different types of approaches that may prove useful as a jumping-off point for today's session. Now, virtually all of these, I should add, have already been mentioned and in several cases discussed at length by one or more previous speakers. Given my own backward-looking orientation, it probably won't surprise anybody that 5 of the 6 items on my list actually focus on non-digital ways of maintaining the relevance and usefulness of largely non-digital collections in an increasingly digital-obsessed scholarly and library environment. So, first, special collections librarians or archivists, particularly those at colleges and universities, need to be more aggressive than ever before in taking advantage of the captive audiences, or at least the potentially capturable audiences, that they have near at hand in the form of faculty and students at their home institutions. A process that certainly begins by identifying and contacting the widest possible array of faculty members with research interests relevant to the library's own holdings, the approach that was very well described yesterday by Jay Satterfield. This process should probably also extend to reaching out to school alumni, not only as potential donors of money, collections, or of their own personal archives, but also as potential users of the special collections libraries themselves. Second, this process of outreach should extend well beyond the borders of the college or university or other sponsoring institutions to seek to draw in members of the surrounding community. And I think such efforts are particularly important and necessary in large cities such as Cleveland, where major cultural institutions are often ensconced amid non-elite populations whose cultural productions and collective experiences have often historically been neglected by special collections libraries. In other words, the library should reach out to surrounding communities, not simply as potential users or patrons of their collections, but also as potential donors of valuable and previously neglected cultural archives of various types, many of which still remain highly in danger of being lost. Third, it seems to me, and I realize that not everybody here is going to agree, that most special collections librarians should, to the extent possible, gear their future purchases of materials to materials that not only have not yet been digitized, but that are either digital proof or at least digital resistant for one reason or another. Most obviously in that regard, I would think that there would be real advantages to focusing on the acquisition of unique manuscript materials as opposed to printed books and periodicals, however rare. And they might also consider acquiring various unconventional types of textual or graphic material, such as scrapbooks or other mixed media artifacts, as well as other sorts of ephemera that are also often unique and that in many cases are at least somewhat resistant to easy digitization. Fourth, to the extent that their core holdings are not unique or are increasingly available in digital forms beyond their purview, special collections libraries should try to sponsor scholarly activities that will draw both scholars and public attention to their best non-digital collections. For example, a small library with a superb collection of first and other rare editions of a particular 19th century novelist might establish a modest annual fellowship for scholars or graduate students interested in doing research on that novelist, or in conjunction with the English department, might sponsor a best paper contest for undergraduates on that author, or organize a scholarly conference devoted to that author, or edit or help to edit a book of essays on that novelist, or even if funding and staffing are available, sponsor an ongoing periodical devoted to the study of that novelist. Fifth, to the extent possible, special collections librarians should familiarize themselves with and do their best to promote those types of scholarship, such as analytical and descriptive bibliography, certain types of history of the book scholarship, and certain types of reader reception scholarship that emphasize the importance of books and even of individual copies of books as physical artifacts. As Paul Ruxin explained yesterday, such scholarship is, by its very nature, requires access not merely to digitized texts, but to actual physical copies of books and other publications. Sixth and finally, there are a wide array of strategies already discussed at length over the past 2 days that involve plunging into the digital future rather than resisting or evading or merely surviving it. As a Luddite at heart, I'll leave it to others on this panel and in the audience to discuss those digital strategies, including the incorporation of born digital archives into special collections, as just described in Stephen Ennis's fascinating talk. But I still would suggest on prudential grounds that if special collections libraries do go ahead and start digitizing some or all of their most important holdings, that they do so very, very carefully and cautiously. It may be that the really big institutions like Harvard and Texas and the American Antiquarian Society can afford to digitize large swaths of their vast holdings without losing their out-of-town patrons. But I'm much less confident about that with respect to small and mid-sized special collections libraries. But in any case, if you're determined to take the virtuous e-plunge and provide free, unfettered, worldwide digital access to your most precious paper collections, I would be sure that your upper-level administrators have agreed beforehand that remote and often anonymous electronic clicks are at least as valid a justification of your existence and funding as flesh and blood users. And now I'm going to introduce the other panelists. Most of you are probably aware that Professor Gerald Early of Washington University in St. Louis, a distinguished and prolific scholar and literary critic, was supposed to join us. Unfortunately, he's unable to attend due to a family emergency. Our first panelist, Athena Jackson, earned her BA in English from the University of Houston and her MLIS from the University of North Texas. Before returning to academia, she worked in the electronic publishing industry, where she focused on digital humanities collections for academic research. She then managed the National Digital Newspaper Program at Louisiana State University, later served as the Special Collections Librarian at the University of Miami, and is currently the Associate Director of the Special Collections Library at the University of Michigan. Athena is an active member of the Rare Books and Manuscripts section of the American Library Association and has spoken nationally on access to historical newspapers and on the issue of diversity in the special collections profession. Melissa Hubbard, who is actually one of the organizers of this conference, earned her BA in English and an MS in Library Science from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, as well as an MA in English from University College London. She previously served as the Rare Books Librarian at Southern Illinois University, as the Rare Books, Manuscripts, and Digital Projects Librarian at Colgate University, and she's currently the head of Special Collections and Archives at the Kelvin Smith Library here at Case. She has particular interest in the pedagogical uses of special collections and in, quote, innovative approaches to exposing hidden collections. Now, to be honest, when I first read that, I had no idea what exposing hidden collections entailed. While I now realize that most of you librarians understand exactly what she means, I think she may still be interested in talking about it. And our third panelist, Tom Congalton, began collecting old and rare books in 1968 while still a teenager. After what he too modestly describes as, quote, a strikingly mediocre academic career at Monmouth College, Rutgers University, and a few other institutions, unquote, he founded Between the Covers Rare Books with his wife Heidi in 1985. In 1999, they went digital, forming a separate operation to sell less expensive books exclusively online, which currently boasts an inventory of over 140,000 volumes. As I discovered just a few days ago, Between the Covers has a wonderful website enlivened with artwork by the cartoonist Tom Bloom. Among many other features, it includes a really neat 3D app that allows customers to rotate the images of thousands of books so that they can be inspected from all angles. So I encourage you to check that out. Tom has served as president of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America and more recently as president of the International League of Antiquarian Booksellers. Our procedure today will be to invite each panelist to say a few words at the outset, and then we'll throw things open for what we hope will be a genuinely freewheeling discussion among both the panelists and everybody else here today. Okay. Athena?
Thanks, Dan. Thanks to Case Western Reserve for making this colloquium happen, and I hope it happens many more years to come. In the spirit of Jim Kuhn's call for leveraging the brain power in this room, I will keep my remarks short, on the shorter side, and I look forward to the conversations my colleagues and I hope to engage you in. But first, a little digression as to the reason we're here, the future. I am Latina. I am a woman. I am a librarian. I'm a special collections professional. I am an administrator, and I think I represent a glimpse of the future. I don't know everything, but I know a lot of people whose collective knowledge makes a cumulative force to be reckoned with. I care a lot about the past, and I am so grateful for the future. A future I believe we will strive for the inclusion of the margin, which will, I hope, enable what is considered typical in a special collections to become redefined by our embracing change and inspiration from all points of the compass. I'm Athena Jackson, the Associate Director of the Special Collections Library at the University of Michigan, and the title of my short comments, and actually, nay, truly, the label for my existence is Exuberant Chaos. Thank you, Jay, for letting us use that perfect chaos, the perfect chaos that is our realm in the library land, because the connotation lends itself to the ideas about the future, and for coining the mantra for this colloquium thus far, as Twitter suggests to us. My trajectory into this field is a bit backwards from most folks. I'd imagine as I came from the digital into the analog. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, allow me to explain. In the early 21st century, not 20th, when I was a dance teacher at a Northern Virginia high school and an erstwhile literature and creative writing student, I answered an ad in a DC alternative newspaper that read, and I paraphrase for dramatic effect, "Do you like to read books? Do you have a BA?" After I determined that this wasn't some alternative lifestyle dating question and decided to call the number, I landed a job as an indexer at Alexander Street Press, an electronic publisher of digital humanities collections, which specializes in carefully curating electronic collections to meet unique research needs in an online environment. Little did I know at that time that I was participating in some of the early phases of digital scholarship, digital humanities, semantic tagging, and all the other phrases that are becoming au courant to our colleagues across the academy. I won't bore you with the details of my time at ASP, but I will say that I learned a lot. I learned the corporate model of creating what is now the common thing in our world, a digital collection. I felt such a passion for my work that I left to get a library degree with the plan of returning and continuing the same career path in e-publishing. They also gave me a little bit of money to go, and I never went back. But it was during library school, in a special collections course, that I realized that perhaps my personal ethos was more aligned with the academic library than a corporate model. And though I know that they're not always mutually exclusive as we get closer and closer to where we are today. So I hope that my experiences offer a fresh and different perspective to special collections librarianship side of things. And in full disclosure, I can also pretty much hold sway, though I'm a little bit rusty with descriptive bibliography, lest you think I'm infiltrating a corporate wonk into this land of experience and discovery. After I understood my vocation to be more aligned with academic librarianship, I began my library career in a state archive in North Carolina and moved into an NEH-funded project in collaboration with the LC, thanks Joel, at LSU. I segued into a special collections librarian position in lovely Miami, Florida, and all of this leading to my current position at the University of Michigan, about which you can quickly read in my bio in the program. So why am I here today? Any of you could be sitting at this dais and answer the questions that we're going to answer, so I truly encourage lines and lines at the microphone. Why am I here today? I forgot where I was. I hope to bring a perspective that understands the small institutional boutique and nimble project creation experience, and also the large-scale institutional scope of a Big Ten or a flagship-style school with the necessary checks and balances of many units working toward the same goal. And all of this is buttressed by my experience in the corporate side of these projects in terms of how I approach planning, piloting, and executing both brick-and-mortar projects and digital projects. In my current position, I feel I bring a lot to the table insofar as finding ways to streamline, codify, and make transparent those processes that may enhance the descriptive, interpretive, and magical moments that occur in our endeavors in the reading room, the classroom, and the digital realm. To the questions posed to this panel in our program on page 9, I pose a few more. What happens to our treasures that were never born analog and were innately digital? How do we harness our efforts to make them apparent to our audiences and relevant to our stakeholders? How do we engage a changing face of scholars who want to see and find themselves in our collections? And how does the digital divide of access and a predominantly English-only descriptions affect the impact of their presence and use online? And I'm talking about American cataloging right now. So I hope some of these questions help you start thinking about where I'm coming from. And I don't have all the answers, of course. But like you, I have a lot of questions. And I look forward to hearing what we all have to say. I close with a statement of gratitude. Considering my path to this dais today, I'm grateful that in our audience include colleagues from NEH, LSU, Miami, and of course, Michigan. So just in case I make any mistakes, I'll have amazing support and colleagues to correct or amend my responses, and I'm counting on all of you to do so. And I do truly stand on the shoulders of giants, not only at these places, but in this room, and I appreciate being allowed to be on the stage to discuss this very important thing, the future. Thank you.
I want to put on my program planning committee hat for a moment and say that it is such an honor and a privilege to host this group here today. Thank you all so much for coming. I am so proud to be a part of this community. But as I have listened to the distinguished speakers on this stage, at times I have looked around and wondered, what are we all doing here? After all, forging the future is going to be a lot of work. Let's review our to-do list. We have to digitize our analog collections, and we can get into this later, Dan, but we do have to do that. And we need to create robust, open online platforms for them, and we need to create rich, linked metadata to facilitate discovery. We have to advocate for our value within our communities, developing innovative outreach and instruction programs. We still haven't settled on perfect practices for collecting and creating access to the avalanche of print and manuscript information that the 19th and 20th centuries produced. But even as we continue to work on this problem, we must substantially increase our capacity to collect, preserve, and provide access to the born digital content that is produced at astonishing volume. We're all familiar with these challenges and the opportunities that they present, and yet we are all here talking instead of at home at our individual institutions working. Why? In an attempt to answer that question, I want to reference John Overholt's wonderful essay, 5 Theses on the Future of Special Collections. If you haven't read it, I can't recommend it highly enough. And since John released it under a CC BY SA license, I can riff on it a bit without fear of infringement. So I want to add my own thesis statement to John's. The future of special collections is community. In her opening keynote, Sarah Thomas emphasized the need for collaboration at scale in our profession. I think we are all here because we more or less agree that we need to scale up our collaborative efforts in order to meet the challenges that we face collectively. Alice Schreier has already alluded to one of the barriers to collaboration. We do, at times, exist in an environment of competition. But I think the more significant barrier is a simpler one. Collaboration is hard. And we're also very busy. How do we scale the walls of our individual institutions and reach out to one another? I have a couple of suggestions. We've talked about open access, but I also want to mention the open source movement in software development. Open source creates development communities around the problems that software can solve. In these communities, shared expertise and open dialogue are tools for solving these problems collaboratively. I propose that we view our profession in open source terms. Just as we think about distributing our collections, I would encourage all of us to think about distributing our expertise and our resources to one another. Conferences like this one are good places to have these conversations, but can we extend the conversations into our daily work? Multi-institutional collaborations shouldn't be occasional or superficial, they should be fundamental. Library leadership should work to develop structures that treat collaboration as core work. I also want to consider the word community in another sense. My esteemed Case Western colleague, Jill Tatum, says that archivists build strong communities through awareness of shared history. I really like that, but I also think that shared history can be a loaded term. We all know that there are many communities with many histories represented in our archives. We must engage these communities as partners for documenting shared histories and for creating and exposing an archival record that is vibrant, complex, and diverse. If we tear down the walls between our professional communities, our user communities, and the communities we wish to document, and treat all of our stakeholders as true collaborators, that will increase the value, relevance, and resonance of our collections more than any exhibit program or show and tell session ever could. To build a community of stakeholders, we need to advocate, but we also need to listen. To ensure that our collections are truly open and to facilitate transformative uses, we shouldn't ask ourselves what our users want. We should ask them, and we should find ways to incorporate their answers into the core of what we do. We can't predict the future, but if we build relationships that help us clarify our priorities, meet our challenges collaboratively, and discover opportunities that we can't yet imagine, we may be able to forge the future we want to see. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. First of all, I'd like to whine a little bit about the topic of this panel. I'm not from your world. I'm just a simple bookseller from out of the past. When it comes to talking about special collections in a digital era, I may seem like an odd choice. In 1969, I went to work shelving books at the Monmouth County Library in Freehold, New Jersey. While I was there, I was surprised to see how quick librarians were to embrace then new library technologies, such as the fax machines that took 20 minutes to transmit a single page, the microfilming of periodicals, and the use of key punch machines for cataloging, and similar modern wonders. Obviously, this openness to and emphasis on developing new library technology, sometimes to what seemed like the detriment of physical books, has continued for nearly half a century and has turned out to be invaluable preparation for our digital age. Thus, librarians in general seem like they're well situated to deal with challenges in the digital age. Most booksellers, on the other hand, are pretty much only interested in expanding their grasp of technology in so much as it positively impacts their bottom line. This recalls a year-long, on-again, off-again conversation I had with Ken Lopez in the mid-1980s about whether or not I needed a computer for my business. Ken, who used to be a programmer who I was asking for guidance, pretty much came down strongly on the side of whatever. I guess my point is that booksellers who deal with institutions in the digital age are not particularly well prepared for this interaction and are going to have to take their cues from librarians. We're unlikely to give librarians what they need unless librarians tell us what that is. From my point of view, what little interaction I've had with digital material has had to do with the manuscripts and emails of living authors, both in harvesting them and in some cases appraising them. And in every case, these events have been fraught with practical problems with which I've been ill-equipped to deal. Obviously, booksellers will have to and are learning, but librarians will have to guide us in how we can serve their needs. However, where I think that booksellers can immediately contribute to the future of library collections is by doing what we've always done, as the hunter-gatherers or truffle hounds for material, and especially for previously neglected material and formats for the use in special collections. This may be a little off point, but the course I co-teach at Rare Book School in Virginia, called Developing Collections, Donors, Librarians, and Booksellers, has a certain emphasis on non-book material such as ephemera, photography, obsolete audio and visual formats, and similar artifacts, both printed and otherwise. One of our students, a graduate student in a non-library field, after having spent most of the week handling 7-inch vinyl records, old cassette tapes of early genre music performances, vernacular photography collections, London prostitute cards, printed cloth broadsides, and other similarly non-book examples that we used in class, observed that these objects, for her at least, served as a sort of gateway drug into special collections and the books and manuscripts that have been more traditionally accumulated there. I believe she referred to it as crack for book people. The beauty of book collecting is that it pretty much includes any possible topic of interest to human beings. If you're interested in anything in the world, there are probably books about it. And as such, our mission as booksellers and our opportunities as librarians and collectors is pretty much unlimited. We make the rules. Increasingly, it seems that the future is going to encompass non-book materials. This obviously will have repercussions not only on what we pursue and how we preserve it, digitally or otherwise, but also on how we view ourselves. When do curators of special collections morph into museum curators, or when do booksellers become antique dealers? We're going to have to confront these questions in the future. Seems to me that our cultural influences, and especially the influences on youth culture, by which I mean anyone who's younger than I am, have become increasingly visually oriented, and these formats will lend themselves to digital preservation. By this, I don't mean that our constituents are only attracted to pretty pictures, but I think that it does mean we're going to have to look for ways to integrate non-book artifactual material into special collections as part of a strategy of interactive outreach. We need to lure students, scholars, and members of the general public into libraries to look at the pretty pictures in order to induce them into further exploring the textual and artifactual richness of the existing books and manuscripts within our collections. I think that all stripes of collectors, and we are all collectors, will find opportunities in this. Strictly from my own point of view, it's always an advantage to find a way to expand the parameters of an existing collection. And there will be financial rewards for booksellers to do this, and there will be professional and creative rewards for librarians who develop and, dare I say, market unusual collections in neglected fields and formats to their constituents. Now, I should say that after every talk, I've wanted to stand up and ask each of the speakers, what can I sell you in the future? Obviously, this is self-serving, but it's also a valid question. What will special collections pursue in the future? I'm willing to be self-serving, but how can we as booksellers serve you? By the way, this isn't a rhetorical question. During the question and answer period, I'll ask you these questions, and I'll be taking notes. One other observation I'd like to make is that in all this serious and admittedly important conversations we're having here, there's little mention of the sense of fun that we all experience every day. For me, at least, and I suspect for many of you, every day is an adventure and a treasure hunt. If we can convey our enthusiasm for our material, I suspect we'll have far fewer anxieties about the future of the book in special collections. Jay touched on this with his exuberant chaos or effusive mania or maniacal, whatever it was. And I guess I'll finish with an anecdote that illustrates the existential dilemma of the modern bookseller. And I'll call it the case of the Willa Cather box. I was, a couple of years ago, or a few years ago, I was at a book fair in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, and another dealer was offering, suitably ensconced in a glass case, a cardboard box, an empty cardboard box. And it really attracted me because it had a really nice label from Alfred A. Knopf, and it was addressed to Willa Cather. And the postmark was really clear, so you could read that, and so it gave you a hint about what was in it. So I spent a couple or $300 on this. The first thing I had to do, because it was really fragile, was take it to a bookbinder who happened to be set up at the book fair and immediately commissioned a folding box to put my empty box in. So, which I think there's probably some sort of Zen lesson there that I'm not smart enough to understand. So that took a month, and I finally got my box back. And then, like Cinderella in the gold, or and the ruby slipper, whatever slipper she was wearing, I had to audition books to see what fit in the box. And I finally figured out, I think I figured out, that it was 2 copies of the illustrated edition of Death Comes for the Archbishop. Well, armed with all of this knowledge, I then called an institutional librarian and said, I want to sell you this empty box for $950. And they said, well, that's ridiculous. We don't want an empty box to Willa Cather. And they said, but what they most said was, we don't collect artifacts. And I'm pretty sure the librarian at that time was standing next to a glass case that had the typewriter and pipes and underpants of a very famous writer. And I said, well, yes, you do. You're standing next to a case that has the typewriter of a very famous writer. But they weren't buying it. But eventually I did manage to sell it to another institutional library where somebody's going to have to digitally preserve this empty box. And somebody's going to have to tell me how to do that. Thank you.
I don't know if any of the panelists want to address each other before we turn it over to the audience.
I have a question for you, Dan.
Sure.
So you've been here for a couple of days, immersed in our world. Have you learned anything that surprised you? Between classes, yes. Have you learned anything that surprised you?
No, like I said, I went to a very similar conference 2 years ago. I got some helpful tips for teaching from a couple of the speakers who described how to use special collections in courses, which I may pick up on and use myself. But that would probably be the main useful information I picked up. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. So I have a question for Tom. My question is, you mentioned that you often do speaking engagements where the end result is you're getting a bunch of responses to what you could sell someone. And can you note temporally when it started to become more electronic, more non-book, that could lend itself to electronic digitization, or do you feel like it's just been sort of slowly happening? Do you get my gist?
Not exactly. I do, I deal with author archives as well. And mostly I cross my fingers and hope that they don't use email a lot, although they do. And we do what we can to try to harvest that. But I can see it. It's in my future. I can see it. And happily, I've just sold an archive where the author doesn't even have a computer. I'm so happy. So, or if he has one, he's not telling anyone. But I think it's obviously it's all going to be part of our future.
Right.
So.
Right.
Well, any questions from the audience or comments from the audience?
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm interested in the question of born digital materials and just, I guess, the whole trajectory of these lowered barriers to publication, right? Because even before things went digital, there was this great lowering of barriers for people who wanted to print materials, and all of a sudden you didn't have to have a hand press to do that. And eventually in post-war United States and Europe, you had mimeograph and xerography and different kinds of photographic, photomechanical reproduction. So you, there's kind of a continuum there, kind of a continuum that as the barriers lower, more communities that have been outside of print culture have gained access to it. And in my experience, I think it's around maybe 1996, 1997, when you could pretty much buy a Dell computer at Best Buy or any serious electronics store. It would come preloaded with Netscape, with a browser. So it's interesting that these online communities emerge where zines had once lurked in the background, right? So you had fanzine producers who all of a sudden stopped making fanzines. They went online. And I'm just wondering if anybody sees any value in archiving those kind of online communities that emerge out of the fanzine movement.
Well, I'll say briefly that I don't see any financial incentive to do that from my point of view. So my answer is no. I suspect theirs is much different. So.
For zines. At the University of Miami, where I worked previously, they have a burgeoning zine collection, and one of the attempts that were made while I was there was to start identifying those zine collections that had gone from the analog to the digital. And if you think that the Wild West of print zines is wild, the online is wild, because you really are in a rabbit warren when you're looking for these because it's, I would argue, intentionally, discoverable in very unique ways that none of us could fathom unless you were part of that community and knew the proper terms of art to identify them. So I think there's merit. I'm just looking for someone to write the best practice.
Did you want to?
Did you want to say?
Oh.
I'm hearing a lot of talk about relationships with collectors, relationships with donors, and I am also hearing a lot about digitizing and making collections available online. But what I am not hearing, and what I would like some response to, is as we open to more communities, collect more things, make things available, what about the relationships with the people who are out there? How is this an overwhelming prospect? Is this a delightful prospect? Because one of the ways the web is moving is that it's not show and tell. They talk back to you. And you're on Twitter, you're on Reddit, you're on Tumblr, and it doesn't work if it's just show and tell. But I don't know, Special Collections has not traditionally established those kinds of relationships with people who were not scholars, donors, booksellers. So how does that part of the future feel to you? What do you think?
That's a really interesting question, especially when you say that the online environment doesn't lend itself to show and tell, because as you said that, I was thinking, Actually, that's exactly what our Tumblr is. It's an online show and tell. And while I have rejected the show and tell model in the classroom, every day I vow I will never do another show and tell session. I do it online all the time. And I'm not building relationships. You're absolutely right. I mean, I hope that people get something out of it and it's enjoyable and it's easy to do. But that's a really good question. I think a couple of things. The network digital environment is transforming relationships, and that's something that's much bigger than special collections, it's much bigger than the academy, and we have yet to see where that's going. So I think we need to be paying attention to what's going on there and thinking about how we can contribute to forging new relationships in an environment where relationships and the way we interact with one another is changing so rapidly and so dramatically. And beyond that, I think that the online environment maybe goes beyond exuberant chaos into overwhelming chaos. You're right, it is overwhelming. And I'll issue my call for collaboration again. I think we need to look at these things collectively. I think this is a great problem that we can look at together because we all face it. There's no one who is exempt from this conversation.
Except those who don't have access online.
She makes an excellent point.
But that notwithstanding, I think the beautiful thing that online engagement does is make the playing field a little level. You're a little bit more, as Steve said, the informal nature of email, the informal way of being online. I'm much more comfortable talking to some of you through an email than if you walked up to me because I'm so in awe of your presence and your institution and your tie or whatever that I'm happy to have that flattened experience with someone to engage at where we're not taking in each other at that moment. We're taking in whatever it is we're looking at together online. So the object is no longer the face-to-face. The object is truly the pure discussion, and I'm really excited about that. We see that in our younger generations right now, where they're able to tweet, J-Lo, and they're okay with that, and things like that. So I think that to level that ground and make our diner accessible and the food really good the internet is a great place to do that.
Yeah, and I think the online environment has made relationships a lot easier in some sense. I have very good professional relationships and sometimes even, dare I say, friendships with librarians and collectors who I've never actually spoken a word to. But it also makes it all the more fun and amusing when you go to an event like this and you actually meet these people. Hey, you're my Facebook friend. And before that, I wasn't really sure why. Now we're finding out, So.
Hi, I'm Patrina Jackson from the University of Virginia. I have a question. It's related to relationships, and specifically, a lot of speakers have touched on the concept of community and making them more inclusive. And I wanted to address specifically how to create to make communities more inclusive in order to make a more accurate and complete record of the things that we have that reflect the diversity of this nation. And I wanted to know what specific plans or practices do you, when I say you, I mean the whole room you, have to include those communities that have normally been excluded from the special collections, the archival world, be they researchers, collection materials, donors, including financial donors. Because when it gets down to it, when I say donor, that's what I mean, financial donors, at least in our case at UVA, and staff. What are your plans to make it a more inclusive community? Because when I look in the audience members, it's an overwhelming majority of people who, when we say inclusive communities, if you're talking about racial communities, sexual orientation, well, you can't see sexual orientation, well, sometimes, depending on the context. It's overwhelmingly not reflective of those communities. So. And I know that there's tensions there. I'm going to leave with this one comment. I was in RBMS, and there was a regional sections meeting, and I was in the southern regional sectional meeting, and there was a lot of difficulty expressed from the staff, which were mostly white and white universities, because there was a tension between the communities of, that they wanted to collect from based on years of slavery and Jim Crow and things like that. So how do we go from talking about it to breaking through that? That's ultimately my question.
Well, I can take that, not so much in terms of the library profession, but a colleague of mine in the history department, Rhonda Williams, who's played a very active role, to say the least, in the social justice initiative at Case, regularly teaches a course which is cross-listed as both a graduate course and an undergraduate course, called City as Classroom, which doesn't actually meet in a classroom except maybe on the first day, first class meeting of the semester, but actually goes out into local communities around University Circle, around where the university is, and combines both academic study with social activism, and draws upon the experiences of members of largely minority communities. And in the context of this conference, or well, after this conference, I'll probably want to talk with Melissa about the possibility of using that course as a way of reaching out to local communities and trying to gain access to archives of those communities and maybe pull those into special collections as a way of diversifying our own special collection here at Case. And I think that model can probably be used at many colleges and universities, especially in large cities.
I would be so delighted to have that conversation with you. And as far as plans go, I, like Jim Kuhn, just drafted a collection development policy for special collections in collaboration with many colleagues and external stakeholders. And it does include a diversity clause. We need to acknowledge that as a profession, historically, we have been complicit in propping up dominant narratives about what history is and who's important. And I don't say that as some sort of youngster, saying, oh, my predecessors did terrible things and made bad decisions. We're all complicit. I make those kinds of decisions every day. And I have to really lean into my discomfort about those things, as Haven suggested yesterday. So it is part of the plan to recognize that the archival record needs to be diversified. How do we act on that plan? Well, I'm going to have a conversation with Dan later. And I think those kinds of things are how we do that. We state that that's what we're looking for, and then we start having conversations with people about how we can document the communities that have been underrepresented in the past.
I just would like to speak on that. It's something I'm very, very passionate about, Patrina, and thank you so much for bringing that up, because, and again, hearkening back to what Haven and I have sat on a sofa for many minutes discussing this in Vegas about how it cannot just be your representative, culturally diverse librarian going out there to make these hard outreach initiatives or challenging outreach initiatives, but it can help to think about things in terms of how we are promoting the profession and making the profession itself more diverse and more embracing. I remember when I was in library school, and in my cohort, it was a large proportion of Latinos were going into public librarianship because they wanted to be at the ready for ESL programs, for acclimating to a new country, a new experience, all of those things that are very noble and amazing that public librarians do every day. And I was sitting in class and someone told me, you can't do what we want to do in special collections. That's so removed from what we are trying to do. You need to come with us. You have this energy and this vibe. And I said, no. You're going to get all of those youngsters and those families involved, and I'm going to catch the football, and I'm going to be there, and they're going to see me when they get to the institution. They're going to see my colleagues embracing them. So it really is twofold. It's diversifying the profession. It's making what we consider the margin the norm, and not even talking about margins, not even talking about traditional. Those kinds of words are loaded, and we need to remember that when we say it. And And I was just about to mention that we have models out there that we could look to for community outreach. And then, like a magician, she stood up, and she's probably going to say something about that. So I will yield to my colleague after this next question to talk about her experiences in Miami.
Well, actually, I want to talk about it too. From my vantage point on the outside looking into librarians, and I always get in trouble when I talk about librarians with librarians, and I especially get in trouble with librarians when I don't differentiate between librarians and special collections librarians. And I don't know how librarians are doing in this particular subject in gathering collections on, marginalized groups, but I certainly think that special collections libraries have taken notice. And for me, I think they have a mandate to collect a lot of these marginalized communities. And from my point of view, I'm more than happy to supply them. And that makes me going out and looking for them and finding, artifacts and the printed record of marginalized communities. And quite frankly, I think special collections libraries are doing a pretty good job of that.
And if I may add one more thing, when we discuss these things, I think it's very important that we don't, and I certainly don't intend to suggest that any panelists are doing this right now, but I think it's very important that we don't objectify marginalized communities, people on the margin. We really need to have conversations. We need to listen, as I said, and we need to diversify our profession to make this happen, I think.
Good afternoon. My name is Pam Eyerdam. I am the Special Collections Librarian at the Cleveland Public Library. And I just have a comment, especially to this academic community. There are great special collections in actual public libraries, Cleveland being the third largest public library in the country. And I do want to extend an invitation, especially to you case people, come visit me. It's about time.
We will.
And probably after the first of the year, we are building at this time a new digital area that's going to be adjacent to special collections, and we'll have a big open house, and it's going to be somewhat on the level of the Freeman Center. But the uniqueness of our collection, especially with the digital public library, is that we are inviting, you're talking about community, the everyday person is also part of our community, and that builds our cultural heritage. And I think that's what the beauty of the Cleveland Public Library is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. I'm Maria Estorino. I chair the Cuban Heritage Collection at the University of Miami. And again, I don't know that I have a question, but I have the questions and the comments that have been coming up here have really resonated with some of the things that I've been thinking about in these past 2 days. And in fact, even kind of drawing in the public library special collections idea. Why do public libraries have special collections? They are community-based organizations that are recognized as trustworthy in a lot of ways for the other kinds of services and programs that they provide in their communities. And there's something for academic special collections to learn from that. And one of the things, it's interesting to hear two different people say, I'm hearing a lot about relationships. I almost feel like I haven't heard enough about relationships. It's really been, we are in the business of stuff, right? But the stuff doesn't come without the relationships, without the people that either created or collected the materials that we are interested in preserving and creating access to. And relationships really come into play, Petrina, where are you? With the question that you ask and creating new donor communities, because so much of it is built on trust and on relationships. And part of that, I think, requires us as academic librarians and and academic special collections leaders to really recognize that the special collection, the library, the university are not the only sites of knowledge or authority. And that is crucial when we think about diversifying our collections and diversifying our profession. There is a lot of knowledge and authority that exists in communities that have traditionally not been part of the special collections environments and collections. And sometimes the challenge working with those communities comes from we are the authority, we're going to take in your stuff and take care of it for you, right? And so that is a comment that I wanted to make, tying to what Steve Ennis said about earlier interventions with writers and dealing with their digital archives. There is something to be said for this kind of pre-custodial relationship in communities, where perhaps we're not going in and saying, oh, you should really give us your stuff, but rather, how can we help you take care of your stuff so that one day it will be ready to be in a repository like ours? The expertise, the technology, the resources that we have available as in being part of large or small academic institutions is something that we can contribute to that relationship. Where maybe we're not, especially with digital technology, maybe we don't need to get the stuff. Maybe we need to go in and help people take care of their stuff and digitize it on site and create access to it, because at the end of the day, that's ultimately the business that we're in, is creating access to this information, whether it's in a rare book or whether a modern archive or an email. I'm going on a little bit. As you can see, I've been thinking about a lot of things. And the other thing that I would say is to also, Melissa, somewhat to what you were saying about not objectifying marginalized communities, not defining diverse communities as marginalized. They're not one and the same. The communities that are not in special collections are not necessarily marginalized. They might be marginalized from special collections, but maybe not societally and culturally. So yeah, those are my rambling thoughts on a little bit of everything that has been discussed. And if anyone would like to discuss it more, I'm happy to. Bye.
Thanks, Maria.
Hi, I'm DJ Hook from Northwestern University. I'm interested in born digital materials, information, however we choose to think of them. So I'm not surprised, and I'm happy to hear that we're talking a lot about that. Not surprised that we are. What I am surprised, though, is we don't seem to be talking much about published born digital information, which is not just a special collections problem, but a library problem, a researcher problem, a future of everything problem. And what I'm specifically talking about are things that are sold now, or not really sold, licensed, that have licenses attached to them that in many cases preclude an institution from acquiring. This is that 5,000-word iTunes license that you click through that says that this sound file or this video is only available to end users. And so you may have a hit record. It may be an important artifact of this time. It's not being deposited. It's not being purchased and taken care of in an institution. That's something that librarians, other than special collections librarians, seem to be talking about. But I seem to think this is a special collections problem because, of course, today that episode of Orange is the New Black that only streams on Netflix is tomorrow's PhD dissertation. And so I guess my question is, other than just to deliver this little sermon that I just did, I guess my question is, why aren't special collections librarians talking more about that? I understand the concerns about born digital are what we would traditionally think of as unpublished information, correspondence, emails, drafts of novels on hard drives. But secondary sources, published materials that aren't going into libraries, and perhaps this connects to what Tom, you might be able to sell us in the future or not. Any thoughts on that?
The Netflix archive.
The Netflix archive.
Sorry.
Is the Library of Congress doing that? Does anybody know?
If there are people in the audience who have thoughts about that, they should absolutely feel free to jump in.
I'll add to it real quick. I have thoughts more complicated.
Reverend Jim.
Because the transition from the paper book to the e-book is happening across publishing, but literary fiction and things still come out in nice hardbound books. But my wife writes genre romance, and her books come out purely as electronic books. And so where the real movement of going all digital is occurring is in the kind of stuff that libraries, well, public libraries collect, but academic libraries don't collect at all. So some of the key digital artifacts that are going to show that transition are the kinds of things that we traditionally ignore, you know, the Sam Hain racy romance stuff. And that's the kind of stuff that we aren't really paying any attention to. So it's another kind of born digital that is getting really, really missed on a much bigger level than say, a Rushdie novel that might come out simultaneously as a hardbound and an ebook. So there's a whole nother layer to that, too.
Right. The development policy of academic libraries writ large. Yeah.
We published a week ago Alice in Zulu, Deseret, Ladino Romanized, and Tongan, all born digitally, went to the press digitally. The publisher had the choice to send them to ebooks or have them print on demand. And so that's our practice. Next month we'll publish another 4 or 6.
It looks like we are talking about making relationships with publishers in a different way in the future, and then the whole messy experience of author rights comes into play, and so many other questions that thankfully maybe the public libraries will take care of it for us by the time we get it. It becomes an archival object. I'm kidding. I'm just trying to pass the buck here, but the idea of born digital definitely transcends our universe, but also hovers over us like a cloud, and we're just doing the best we can, and having these models for maybe the born digital manuscripts might lend itself to models for publishing in the future, and that might be the purpose for the next colloquium.
Hi, Joel Worrell from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Thanks very much, Athena, for your kind acknowledgement. Appreciate that. Part of what I wanted to say was actually just said much more eloquently and passionately by Maria with regard to breaking out of a kind of ownership construct and moving much more toward a joint stewardship type of a paradigm. And I think that's so important in addressing this question about diversification. But I also wanted to pose, I guess, a general question to everybody with respect to digitization. I've been a little bit surprised in this panel, too, hearing a kind of a note of caution about digitization. All of the evidence that we have so far, including reports put out by my good colleagues at IMLS, suggests that digitization increases on-site activity and on-site use rather than decreasing or precluding it in some way. And so I guess I'm wondering, why is that still a concern? Is it still a concern? Should I be taking back to Washington that we shouldn't be putting as much? We've been putting millions of dollars into digitizing collections, as many of you know. What do I take from all of this?
Well, in fairness, I'm the only one who expressed concern and skepticism on this panel, and I base it simply on logic and on my own activities as a scholar. I'm not going to drive 2 hours to go somewhere to look at something that I can see digitally online. And though it hasn't happened yet, come back in 30 years and see where all the special collections are. I mean, I find it somewhat dismaying that the one group of librarians who I thought might be somewhat skeptical or critical, or at least nervous about digitization, seem to be lemming-like, rushing toward the cliff. And, AAS is a very big institution, but a small special collection that really has focused on printed materials that are now going to be easily available digitally. Why would scholars go there? Now, those special collections may survive through pedagogic uses of their collections, but it seems to me that they are not going to be frequented by scholars. Now, maybe they never were in large numbers, but I know I'm not going to get in my car and drive. And I'm probably in the 2% of scholars who are most attuned to books as physical artifacts. I do history of the book. I collect books and manuscripts. I love books and manuscripts, but I'm not going to drive somewhere. I mean, life's too short. I'm not going to drive somewhere if I can access it digitally.
And all I'm saying is that there's no evidence that supports that claim, and it points to the contrary, actually.
Thanks, Joel, for what you said in your first part of your statement, because I just wanted to qualify what I meant by margin so that you understood. I meant the margin of our collections right now. They're in the periphery. I would argue, not at my present institution, but like people I've talked to anecdotally, they're not given the proper funding to make things happen. It's like, oh, just go get them to donate it, but we'll go ahead and buy this other person's stuff, and and it starts to look like a scary trend, and that terrifies me when I hear those stories. And I'm proud to be from a place that does not align itself to those types of conversations. But that's where I mean by I'm very happy to be not marginalized as much as I possibly can.
By the way, I love digitization. I encourage every small and mid-sized archive to digitize all their stuff, and it makes my work far more efficient. My concern is purely with the well-being of the special collections themselves.
And I love artifacts and original materials. We're about preservation in it.
Great.
I want to say in response to Dan's point that we're not going to stop collecting also. So even as we digitize, we are bringing new material in. And I think that our collecting practices have changed and will continue to change based on what is available online and how scholars are using that material and how that material interacts with what we have physically in our collections. So things will change. As Sarah pointed out, libraries still operate largely on a 20th century model in many ways. We're still imagining what the 21st century will look like for us. But I don't fear digitization, although I will admit, like Jay, who said that he, until very recently, felt a little bit controlling about the way materials are presented online. I have those concerns sometimes as well, but like Jay, I really try to push myself past them. I want to get our stuff out there, let it be promiscuous, as I read in an essay once recently, and let our patrons use it for what they will.
Bob Jackson. One thing we haven't heard about in most of it is how the librarian is learning to train to deal with the donor or the collector of the object or the artifact, whether it be digital or a rare book. What are your thoughts about that, all four of you?
How the donor is trained to work.
How the librarian is trained.
To work with the donor.
Right.
Well, we're out. Librarians.
Well, no, the book dealer.
No, I'm not entirely out.
No, you're not. You're a facilitator.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I often have collectors come to me asking what they should do with their collections. Of course, mostly what I want them to do is give them to me or sell them to me, and so that I can sell them to a library or a private collector. But very often it's not the type of material that I'm interested in. And I've watched a lot of librarians, and especially at larger institutions that have the time to do so, cultivate donors very, very carefully and very, very assiduously and sometimes relentlessly. So, I mean, I don't know how they're trained to do it, though.
Donor relations, at least in the institutions I've worked at, have been wonderfully supported by both our development offices as well as our leadership in the library, and then the curators or the heads of special collections. What I really like about Michigan is when we had our recent celebration for our donors and thanking them for their contributions, they had the good sense of bringing different pieces of our department to that event. So it wasn't necessarily my doing any asking or my doing any of some of the more seasoned people can do, like my boss or the curators, but I was there to be a part of those conversations, to answer questions about the material, and even a very new, fresh staff member was with us, and she got the experience of what that side of donor relations looks like. So I think training sometimes happens, particularly with relationships, by putting you in there, but also protecting you from saying something wrong or saying something out of turn. We all work in places where you have to be really careful what kind of donor you reach out there. They might belong to another group in your academy and those kinds of things. So we're very cautious, but we're also, I would argue, encouraged to be excited and passionate about the stuff, to be excited and passionate about what the collector's knowledge and foresight brings to it, and to encourage that conversation, be it in months or in what people think of as many, many years. So I hope that that kind of training is and I believe there's some kind of professional development at, I don't want to say at Rare Book School, but I could be wrong about working with donors. Yes, thank you. And there is a professional support in Rare Book School.
Terry would know.
Yeah, thank you. He just said that. So we do have ways to send our junior staff to places so they can be coached by Alice Schreiers and everybody else in this room.
I'll just say briefly, sorry. With regard to training, I tend to agree with Athena. I think these things happen through transmission of knowledge on the job. I don't know of any library schools that teach donor relations.
No.
I'd be interested to hear about it if there are any, or I'd be interested to hear if the museum studies community is doing that kind of training. But again, I think that on the job knowledge transmission from one experienced professional to a new professional is a great way to go. And my former boss, Pam Hackbart-Dean, is in the audience somewhere. And she was really fundamental for me in learning how to work with donors.
I know we're running out of time. My name is Jeff Resnick. I'm with the National Library of Medicine. I'm chief of the History of Medicine Division there. On the subject of donor cultivation, I'll put a plug in for the Foundation Center, which is a nonprofit that serves nonprofits. I believe there's a brick and mortar branch here in Cleveland. They have in the past offered wonderful courses for donor cultivation and grant writing and that kind of thing. So just on that note, I came from the nonprofit sector before I came to the National Library of Medicine. I'm responding to the offer to stand up and talk about born digital collecting. And there's the wide scope of things here. The expanse of the internet today, every week, every day, what we generally think of as historical, whether it's 1680 or 1980, it's historical. The stuff that's coming out on the internet, even as we speak, is going to be history 24 hours from now. A lot of that stuff is going to be determined one day to be the special collections of this particular era. So in the expanse of historical material, the material that's being generated today will be the special collections of 100 years from now, or 200 years from now, or 500 years from now. So why am I making that point? Making that point because it comes down to training, it comes down to leadership, and it comes down to breaking down the silos among and between special collections units and other departments and units within universities and other organizations to harness the skills collectively, the partnerships, Melissa, that you were describing. Those types of partnerships and collaborations, as much as they can be uncomfortable, and we pursue them at NLM in many ways across our units, as much as they can be uncomfortable, they're absolutely necessary if we are going to be the good stewards of historical material for future generations. The National Library of Medicine just the other day announced a web collecting initiative around the Ebola outbreak. So we're actively collecting websites and other born digital material to document what's going on, because that stuff is really ephemeral. We're focusing on federal sites, the response to the CDC, the response of HHS, but that's a capacity that we have, and I recognize that we have it and others don't. I feel very much that it's the responsibility of NLM and other federal agencies to provide guidance and support and do what we can to support these types of initiatives elsewhere among your institutions. That may not always come down to money. I don't have the money that NEH has, with respect to Joel. But we've got knowledge and capacity where we're happy to advise, because we can't do it alone. There was a mention of leave it to the public libraries. No. And don't leave it to the federal government, because, because for all the reasons with respect, but because the knowledge the knowledge of the history of medicine is not uniquely held by the NLM, which happens to be the world's largest biomedical library. That's fantastic, and we're here to serve. But the knowledge of history of medicine is resident in local localities and regions and states, and that's the continuum of that history. It's not uniquely held by us. It's held by all of you. So anything that we can do at the National Library of Medicine to support you through knowledge, counsel, that kind of thing, we're happy to do it. Because I think the stakes are really, really high. And I really commend those of you who've come to this symposium to talk about these really hard issues, many of which can be quite uncomfortable, and I recognize that. So thank you very much for the opportunity to offer these thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just on the topic of training for advancement and development, I'd like to put a plug in for the Aladdin Conference, the Academic Library Advancement and Development Network, an annual conference for development officers of academic libraries. I attended with our development officer and my dean this past summer, and there were a remarkable number of special collections librarians there, and some great programs given by special collections librarians. ALADN, shout out.
Thank you. Yes.
Barbara Pryor from Oberlin College. I'm the art librarian at Oberlin. We're just about an hour southwest of here. I would like to follow up on the comments that have been expressed regarding diversity and moving beyond a more traditional paradigm for special collections. And it's fueled almost entirely by my profession, an art librarian, and my position running an art library and also managing in our world, a very important special collection. The digital era has created opportunities that, in my mind, should be the direction of any future planning. And by saying that, when I say that, what I mean is this. I'm very pro-print. Art libraries are one of the few collections that actually increase in value over time. So I spend an exorbitant amount of my time, but still never enough time, identifying and protecting materials that were sold for $25 10 years ago, and now they're $2,500. So that's a big part of what I do, is identifying and protecting print materials. But on the other hand, because of the advent of this digital technology and the availability of images, I can make collections available and archive and document them in ways I couldn't have before. And the example for us is mail art. I don't know, does anybody know about correspondence art or mail art? It's been called the longest-lived modern art movement that nobody knows anything about. And there's good reason for that, because for 50 years, artists in North America, South America, Europe, and East Asia, Eastern Europe, exchanged art through just the regular US or other governmental mail. They ran completely under the radar, which was a wonderful thing. There was communication going back and forth across the Iron Curtain, for instance, that no one knows anything about, because unless you know a mail artist, or you happen to be one, there's no access to the network. Well, one of my big problems in managing our very large collection, it's over 25,000 items, is name authority. Because mail artists love to use aliases, which is great until you have to figure out who this person is. Is Cracker Jack Kid really his name? And I got an idea from this conference of how to manage that. I'll just contact the mail artists that my donor is in touch with and ask them, who the heck is this person? What's their real name? Where do they live? So in terms of crowdsourcing this resource, I've gotten a tremendous, a really good tip and an avenue to go forward. But I've been a little surprised at how much of the conversation has been about managing print and textual revisions of authorship and important books. I'm very much into important books, but in my world, that's a very small percentage of what our culture represents and what special collections should be doing. I think that there's much more available to us now that we should be grabbing hold of that will expand the types of formats and objects that we represent, or allow us to finally represent them, because we couldn't before in the pre-digital age. So my hope is that I guess this is really a comment to you, Mark, about the closing comments, that you will, chart a course for us that will, sorry, chart a course that will build on the strengths of the past and use, yes, anytime, yeah. Don't ever make an enemy of the head of special collections for the Library of Congress, just FYI, not a good idea. Chart a course for us that will really embrace the opportunities that we see, rather than, worry about the difficulties of documenting works written in a digital format. So that's my comment, and I'd also just like to hear other, if the panel has feedback about what that,
I'll say that I think that books are an increasingly small percentage of what all of us do, and I'm also being told that we're out of time.
Not quite. Oh, go ahead. Okay.
Okay. Hi, I'm Valerie Pruitt from the University of Houston, and for transparency's sake, I am the digital collections librarian, and I've never done descriptive bibliography. So while everyone has been talking, it's been really interesting conversation that I've really appreciated, and I've had two very quick, unrelated thoughts. The first is that it's probably clear that I don't fear digitization. But what I do fear is that we are digitizing more and more, and it is not discoverable. And so we are putting these materials online, and the people that we want to access them are not finding them, either because of metadata issues, because our discovery systems do not handle these materials well. So that is one of the things that I fear, rather than the digitization itself. And also, rights issues. A lot of us are putting things online and having takedown policies and things like that, but then our users do not know what they can do with those materials, because we're not exactly sure, because there are so many issues with copyright in the digital age, with orphan works and all of those things. So that's another thing that I fear when we talk about digitization. And my second thought, which is completely unrelated to that, is that we're talking about reaching out to underrepresented populations, underrepresented in our collections, underrepresented in our users. And I think digitization is a way to reach out to and represent those populations. As an example, at the University of Houston, like many university archives, traditionally our digitization has focused on yearbooks and photographs of important buildings and important people and homecoming and things like that. But we recently digitized and put online documents related to the integration of our university. And we can be looking at things like that, putting online the papers of some social rights work related to Mexican Americans on the border, the founder of LULAC, things like that that we have in our collections that we can use as outreach and to show that we are interested in those communities.
Thank you. Thanks, Valerie. And I want to use your comment to talk about our telephone call we had a while back when I called up Houston and said, hey, I have an idea for Michigan, but I need to sell it to my boss. Can you give me some feedback on how you're harnessing these one-off image requests from the reading room and one-off image requests for an online exhibit? And what do you do with those images? And how or do they become a digital collection? Everybody has their own ways of approaching this based on that triangle of resources, cost, and time, right? And so one of the things I'm working on at Michigan with the blessing of my administrators is a pilot called the Special Collections Library Image Bank. And this bank is, I have the fortune to have an abundance of colleagues at Michigan that can give me all kinds of advice, from legal counsel to metadata experts to you throw a rock and you hit a library expert in Ann Arbor. And as a result, I was able to put together a plan where we would be thinking about how we take an image request and we make it something that we can not necessarily reuse to stick our thumb at copyright experts, but more to think about digital preservation, taking that object out and putting it under the scanner or the camera. Typically, some of these books cannot be put into a scanner. They need the photographer there to handle them carefully. And do we need to do that every time, something, because we all have those scary files in our computers right now that have like all of those images, and you're like, what do I do with this? And I don't remember why I did this. And I'm really trying to make that a meaningful collection, a miscellany. And so I've worked with Michigan Library Legal Counsel to come up with ways that we can do this in phases so that it's an experiment. Right now, I mean, I am doing the low-hanging fruit. I am doing public domain, but I'm also capturing really interesting metadata. I want to know why, from the onset, this image was requested. I want to know, was it for publication? Was it for instruction? Was it for exhibition? Was it for donor relations? No, why did we do this? So that we also can start telling the story of our electronic outreach and also demonstrate impact of our electronic outreach. Because, you know, people walk by our reading rooms and say, oh, there's only 2 people in there. And I'm like, yeah, we have thousands of people contacting us right now online. So we need to harness that virtual reading room in the same way we do it in the space that we work with. And I'm really happy, and I'm happy to share my plan with anybody who's interested in the image bank pilot. I'm really excited about it and nervous all at the same time.
I think we just have time for one more question or comment.
I guess it's a comment. It's a little story. Since we were talking about donor relations, we've been talking about increasing outreach to people from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups and collections in that area. So I just have a little story. So I'm on Twitter, and for those of you who don't know, Twitter actually has a pretty high percentage of African American and Hispanic users. A lot of African American and Hispanic people are, really connected to cell phones, so they do a lot of tweeting. So that's actually one place that's great to reach out because, on the internet you can just follow, on Twitter you can just follow people and make comments to them and get to know them. So we had an exhibit. I'm from the University of Houston. I'm curator of the Houston Hip Hop Collection. So we had an exhibit about Houston hip hop, and I saw a guy on Twitter, and I knew we had a photograph of his father in the exhibit. So I tweeted him, and I said, hey, did you know there's a picture of your dad in the exhibit? And he said, no way, I didn't know. I'm going to come down and see it. So he came to see it. I gave him a tour of the collection. We kind of went back and forth a few times. I borrowed some material. His father had a recording studio in Houston, so I borrowed some material and did a little kind of mini exhibit, and we got to know each other just back and forth. And then I ended up going to his home and acquiring a collection of master recordings, which were all born digital. So I just thought, since I had a story that could relate to donor relations, using social media, bringing in material and working with audiences from racial and ethnic groups, and born digital collections. And some of the material that we've actually digitized a lot of the material from the Houston Hip Hop Collection in our digital library, and it gets reused in all kinds of ways. If you go on YouTube and look at certain Houston rap videos, you'll see fans have integrated images from our collections into the videos.
Right on.
Well, very fast.
Very fast. Because you raised the question and because the NAH doesn't think it exists, this is real fact time. The Newberry Library has one of the great genealogical collections in the world, other than what's in Salt Lake, probably the greatest genealogical collection, since genealogy research is now done basically online through several commercial sites. Reader days in genealogy at the Newberry have fallen by more than half. My question is, and I think the use of online resources is very much a function of what it is and who's using it. And people who do genealogy research are not people likely to be in this room. Nevertheless, the question is that I have for all of you, think about this. Why do you care? What difference does it make how people use your resources? If you don't buy the things and put them online, they won't be used at all. So ask yourselves, when you make a decision, should I put something online? Should I buy something physical? Those are not mutually exclusive opportunities. And to the extent you all seem to say you care about maximum access, then use every tool available to you, the physical book and the online image.
Well, thanks very much for that. And thanks to everybody for making this such a lively session.